I am delighted to present Scott Forschler, who is an independent scholar who holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Minnesota with a specialization in the foundations of morality and universalizability tests. He is writing a book called The Logic of Morality and is the author of many scholarly articles on ethical theory and other topics from Flannery O'Connor to Zen Buddhism and to the tension between perfection and workability in engineering design. Sounds quite interesting. So with that, I'd like to present Scott Forschler. Have to unmute, Scott. You're mute. There you go.
There we go. Now you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you, Fred, for that introduction. And now I'm going to do this slideshow sharing. And do you see a slideshow?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll go through that. And I think what's changed is my PowerPoint software has changed. It's not that Zoom is doing something different, but somehow... Okay, there we go. Morality demystified. So a lot of people find morality mystifying. I'm going to try to change that in your minds. When I was young, at least, I found morality, at least the source of it, kind of mystifying. I remember once reading an article where they were talking about some political figure and saying, how can we change this person's mind? It can't be prudentially, we can't give them prudential reasons to change. It could only be moral suasion. And I was kind of struck by that. Like, wait, I've heard of moral suasion, but what does that mean exactly? What's the force of it? We can all immediately understand without any puzzle why I have reasons to do things prudentially or instrumentally. Like, for example, if I want to pound a nail through a board, I have reason to take a hammer.
You're going to agree with me.
Oh, by the way, I think the Scrantons are, oh, there you go. You're muted. Thank you. Yeah, if I'm trying to pound a nail through a board, I have instrumental reasons to use a hammer rather than, say, a screwdriver. That's not going to work so well. That's really unmysterious. That's straightforward. Everyone understands that. But why do I have moral reasons not to just eat when I'm hungry, but to feed other people when they're hungry or help them pound their nails into boards or do other things that I could lend a hand to when they're in need? What's the force of that? It's a little bit mysterious. And because it's somewhat mysterious and often seems to override and transcend our self-interest, which again has a very clear psychological force, it seems kind of strange. Where does this power, where does this motivational force come from? What's the justification for it? Well, some people, feeling that there's a force here, but not knowing how to explain it, try to appeal to something supernatural, religion, or something even different from that, maybe some deep Platonic essence or fact in the world that is deeper than any material fact. So some kind of invisible granite in the foundations of the universe that says, thou shalt do this and not that, and so forth. Unfortunately, because we don't have empirical access to whatever this mysterious supernatural origin is, we end up only with a lot of people claiming they have access to that supernatural fact. And that is why this explanation tends to give credence to arbitrary moral claims, which are presented as just inexplicable demands. Someone can easily claim God tells you not to kill, not to rape, not to steal, and so forth. And okay, you might buy that. But then he could just as well claim God tells us to all wear green hats. And if you say, well, why would he want that? Well, he just does. If this force of morality if this justification for it is completely unrelated to our self-interest and completely otherworldly, you don't have any argument that God couldn't have commanded us all to wear all green hats, or even worse, oppress those people who do not wear green hats along with us. So then it sounds like you're trying to get on an objective basis for morality, but in fact, it becomes in practice deeply subjective because everyone could have their own opinions about what this supernatural force tells us to do. Now, others go the opposite direction and try to ground morality in natural facts, but I think too often they ground it in oversimplified facts of biology, like instincts that we've been evolved to have, things that contribute to the preservation or sustenance of the species. social or cultural training, teaching, things that are norms that society around us has shaped in us, or just idiosyncratic feelings we have, which might come from biology, might come from society, might just come from weird things in our brain that have nothing to do with anything else. And some people have tried to argue that there are ways of grounding morality in those facts. But of course, these even more obviously have often subjective results, and they could vary wildly differently from one group to another, and often be very harmful when they're practiced. I'm going to argue that morality is wholly explicable in natural terms without sacrificing objectivity. So if you have to press me, I'd say I'm closer to the second because I believe there's a natural foundation for it, but we have to think more carefully. So since we're talking about moral values, I'm going to start by asking and giving an answer to the question of what are values in general? Well, a value is a kind of thought. It's a disposition we have to act in a certain way. And it operates in conjunction with another type of thought we call a belief. And I'll simply claim here that values are representations in our minds of states of affairs as desired, as to be brought about or maintained, as opposed to a belief, which is a representation of some state of affairs as factual, as the way things actually are. And together, these motivate us to do various things. In general, if our beliefs about the world do not match the way we want the world to be, as represented in our values, then we're motivated to try to change those facts to make the world more like the way we want it to be. If we believe that, at least in certain respects, the world is the way we want it to be, then we're motivated to keep things the way they are and to resist change, at least in that respect. Now, values and beliefs are, I think, pretty clearly naturalizable. There are some people who would dispute that, but if you think that they're not natural, then you're going to have to postulate some non-natural aspect to all animals, not just human beings. So if you think you require like a supernatural soul or something to have values and beliefs, well, then squirrels and foxes and even snails must have souls. That's kind of an unusual view. I'm going to take the view that we can naturalize values and beliefs, that these are simply things that all animals do at various times in their lives. Squirrels and foxes are my two examples. Squirrels have beliefs and values about acorns and foxes. They think there's an acorn here. There's no acorns over there. Acorns are yummy. I'm going to eat this acorn. I'm going to act to consume it. I'm going to bury this one. And I'm going to try to cover it with dirt and so forth. These are values that they have. They also want to be very far away from foxes. Foxes, on the other hand, are probably pretty neutral as far as acorns go, but they love squirrels. They taste delicious. Okay, now setting that aside for a moment, again, I've just said these are natural facts, natural characteristics of us that we can represent the world using values and beliefs. Now, let's talk about when we make moral valuations and look at them. Now, I'm not going to try to give you a proof here, but I'm going to give you a set of variations on a simple scenario and elicit your intuitions about when we would make not just a valuation, but a moral valuation about somebody in this case. And this is nothing complicated. If I was to ask about your intuitions on abortion or euthanasia or capital punishment, we might have some disagreement. I'm going to ask about a really simple case where I think we're all going to agree. The general scenario is person A is walking down a sidewalk past person B on a bench. Okay, straightforward. Now, in the first case, first variation, A accidentally trips when he's in the vicinity of B. Falls down, skins his knee, has a little bit of pain. Nothing too serious, but it hurts. B had nothing to do with it. Obviously, we would not apply a moral judgment in this case. We wouldn't say that anyone has done anything wrong. Certainly B hasn't. He just happened to be in the area. Variation 2. B trips A, but not intentionally, completely by accident. His foot was sticking out too far. His face was buried in a newspaper or book. A was equally careless, didn't see where B's foot was, tripped, fell on the ground. So there was a causal connection there between their two bodies. But here again, we would not apply a moral judgment. B has not done anything morally wrong. We would regret the outcome, as we would in the case of the first case, but we wouldn't make a moral judgment about what anyone has done here. Variation 3, B does intentionally trip A. Now, let's assume that these are strangers, that and A doesn't deserve this. There's no prior good reason for tripping A. B just walks, B is sitting on the bench, sees A walking down the sidewalk and thinks, I hate my life and I wish more people were suffering the way I was, and I'm going to trip this person. Sticks out his foot, A falls down, skins his knee, has some pain. Clearly, we would morally disvalue what he has done. Say there's a proper moral judgment to be brought to bear on B's action. Case 4. B tries to do that. Again, same motivation, same lack of good reasons for doing this, sticks his foot out, and A just walks past him. The foot doesn't interact, or A recovers, doesn't matter how, but in any case, it is, for whatever reason, unsuccessful. A does not fall down and skin his knee. Did B do something morally wrong? Again, pretty clearly, yes. This is something bad, even though it did not result in the intended outcome. Finally, case 5, B sees A walking by and thinks, oh, I wish he would join me in my misery. I wish he would suffer pain. I hope he falls down and trips. But he doesn't stick his foot out. And in fact, A does not trip, keeps walking past him. Has B done something wrong? Yes. I think we would say that there's something morally deficient, morally defective in B's character. Now, we might say, in fact, I would insist that he did something a little bit less bad than he did in cases 3 and 4, where he intentionally actively tried to trip A. Still, there is something wrong with B. We do want to make a disvaluation of his behavior, even if it's only behavior in his head. Now, so we've got 2 cases where we do not make a moral evaluation of B's activity, 3 where he does. Do they have anything in common? Well, let's look at some of the live options. A is hurt in some of these cases, but that's cases 1 through 3. That does not correlate with the difference between when we would make evaluation of B and when we wouldn't. In cases 2 and 3, B caused this pain, but again, that's not the correlation we're looking for. And he tried to cause it in cases 3 and 4. But again, that doesn't capture all the cases we're looking for. But what 3, 4, and 5 do have in common is that B valued A being hurt, or we might say he wanted or desired A to get hurt. And indeed, that seems to be exactly what we're accusing A of doing. He has the wrong values. And so when we look at that from the outside, we make a disvaluation of B's values. In other words, moral judgments are not just judgments about what happens or about some behavior, but about the values that other people have, which sometimes results in behavior, and maybe resulting in that behavior makes it worse in some respects. But it's the valuation that comes first and is the primary and sort of essential element of what we do, or I should say, of what is our object of moral evaluation. We are evaluating other people's and sometimes our own values. Another way to put this is that moral values are what we call higher order values. Now, in general, a higher order X is any X which is about another X of the same kind. And there could be all kinds of X's in this case. I gave you an instance of higher order values. We can also have higher order beliefs. I believe that some of the things I'm telling you in the presentation today are true. I believe that some of the things I believed 10 years ago are false. And who knows, alas, maybe some of the things I believe today are also false. That's a higher order belief I have about my other beliefs. You can also have higher order books. You might have read a nonfiction book about how to write a book, or a fiction book where a novelist is the main character. And we've also seen movies that are about movies, the process of making a movie, the life of a movie maker, possibly a fictional one. If you've seen any Woody Allen movies, about half of them fall into this category, movies about movies or movie making. So these are higher order books, higher order films. And once on a plane, I saw a young lady who was wearing a highly decorated hat, and one of the decorations on it was a little tiny hat pinned to the side of the big hat. And I thought to myself, that is a higher order hat. Well, that might be taking the concept a little bit too far, but you get the idea, okay? Now, I'm going to suggest that higher order thinking is the one unique distinguishing characteristic of human animals. It is what sets us apart from all other creatures. And if you think, oh, there's something else that is unique to us, I'll bet that whatever that other feature is, language, tool making, it is facilitated by or arises from higher order thinking. It's because we can look at our own behavior and value or disvalue it and have beliefs about it with respect to how it works in the world, that we can say, you know, what I was doing yesterday doesn't work so well, doesn't make me happy. Let me try something different. I change my behavior as a result. I get a different tool. I cooperate with people in a different way. I say something, they say something back. All of these things arise from higher order thinking. If you didn't start with higher order thinking, you wouldn't be able to do the many myriad things that set us apart from, for example, squirrels and foxes. So higher order thinking gives us greater control over the world and over ourselves. It facilitates creativity and inventiveness that other creatures do not have. And it raises questions and puzzles about the meaning of what we're doing and about ethics. By the way, I'm mostly using the word morality here. Ethics, morality, not quite interchangeable, but for my purposes, pretty much the same thing. Now, I'm going to make the claim that higher order thinking itself is very easily naturalizable. All you need to have your values and beliefs go higher order is a feedback loop, or what we also call recursion. And this is easily naturalizable. Every first-year student in computer science or electrical engineering knows how to build a feedback loop, and it quickly learns the power of a feedback loop, how it can do things that would be extraordinarily difficult or even perhaps completely impossible without it. So I've given you 4 illustrations here. The first 2 are just kind of simple, generic examples of how to illustrate a feedback loop for some kind of decision procedure. The third is an electrical engineering feedback loop. There are billions of these in every radio, television set, and computer. Without a lot of feedback loops like that, transistors wouldn't do the kinds of things we want them to do, and you wouldn't be seeing me here today. So they're very powerful. The fourth panel is a bit from the Foxtrot comic. I'm not sure if that's still in print, but some of the people my age might remember Foxtrot. And here the kid is trying to pull something over the teacher's head here. You don't need to know any details of the C programming language really to understand what's going on here. All you need to do is think about the kinds of things that a student might be required to do as punishment in class. And if you look at a few of the keywords in that complex program there, you can figure out what he's trying to do with this computer program. Again, the teacher is not impressed, but clearly he's trying to get away with something by simplifying his task, using a feedback loop that says do something over and over and over again. Very useful, very powerful. We'll see more examples of how powerful recursion is. One of the things it does is it leads to universalizability. When we're talking about valuation, if I have a higher order valuation of my own values, my own valuational principles, we might say, like in some situation S, I'm going to do action A. And then I say that principle itself is something I value. I think it's good for me to act on that. Then if I'm really valuing that principle of action, then I'm valuing that principle wherever it appears. If I value myself doing it right now, then as long as it can be applied tomorrow, I would value myself doing it tomorrow. And I would value Tom, Dick, or Harry doing it as well. I would apply it universally. I would value it wherever it appears. Now, this adds a new and very powerful constraint upon our behavior, because there are some things I can value because it leads to success for me. It satisfies my ends. And if we're just dealing with a first order valuation, that's all we need. That's the only constraint relevant. But once we go higher order, if I'm trying to value my own valuations, then there's a constraint that something might be successful, might be satisfying for me when I do it, but not satisfying for me when somebody else does it. Okay, straightforward, simple example is stealing something. Okay, so let's say you've got a nice TV set, and I look at that and go, I wish I had that nice TV set. Oh, I know. I'm going to follow the principle whenever someone has something nice that they like, or that I like, I'm going to take it from them. That's what the action I will value myself doing in response to that situation. And I do that, and I get your TV set. Ah, cool. That satisfies my desires. But now we've got a problem. If I then have a second order approval of what I've just done, then implicitly I'm valuing you taking that TV set back, or taking my car or my house or my computer or whatever else you see in me that you would like to have. And I don't want you to do that. Now, whether you do it or not is immaterial. The fact is, I've implicitly valued you doing it, approved of your doing it. But by doing so, I've approved of you doing something that frustrates my ends. Okay, so there are a lot of actions, of course, that are instrumentally successful that are no problem here. If I value myself pounding a nail into a board with a hammer, it's no skin off my nose if you pound nails into boards with your hammer. That's fine. That's easily universalizable. And so are many, many other activities. But those activities which are instrumentally efficacious only because they hurt you, those are not going to pass this higher order test of valuing it at a higher second or third order level, and hence do not pass the universalizability test. Now, all of this should sound very familiar because it's embodied in the most famous, well-known universalizability rule, the golden rule. Okay, and now we'll come back to that in a few minutes. There are others. There are some philosophers who critique the golden rule and have proposed alternatives or variations on it. If you've taken a philosophy class, you might have heard of moral supervenience or the categorical imperative of the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. And there are other variations, which I've studied in great detail. But if you have questions about those, you can ask them later. I'm not going to talk about them in detail. Now, if you're with me so far, we can go back to our original question: where does morality come from? Where is its source? And answer some very important questions about it. First of all, where does it come from? It comes from any agent able to make a consistent higher order valuation. There's no special person or source we need to go to. Anyone who can think this through, anyone who can make a higher order valuation, can work out this fairly, in many cases, simple logic. Would I want other people to do the same kind of thing I'm doing? And we all do so all the time. And we call this evaluation that we're always capable of engaging in our conscience. It's our implicit awareness of what we cannot consistently value at the higher order level. And this means that moral values are not special because of their source, not because they come from God or because they're etched in golden or granite tablets somewhere in the universe. They're not special because of their intrinsic qualities, like they're always about biology or they're always about society or something like that. What makes them special is that they are universalizable. They are potential objects of higher order valuation, and some other values are not. Those ones are ones we have to reject. Now, moral values, of course, sometimes require us to sacrifice our self-interest. Sometimes I can only act morally if I sacrifice my own interests and possibly even inflict some pain upon myself or accept it in order to help someone else. But morality also provides us something that we can't get from merely instrumental valuation, and that's self-approval. I can look at myself, reflect upon myself, and say, yeah, at least in some respects, this guy is okay. I like who I am. Squirrels, foxes, snails, they can't do that. So we do have something up on them. So this is the trade-off. We can value ourselves, even if sometimes that's at the cost of some of our first order valuations, satisfying certain of our desires that we have. Now, I'm going to make a much stronger claim. I've argued that morality can come from higher order valuation, which leads to the universalizability constraint. And when we apply that in practice, we see that, it says stealing is wrong, hurting other people without a good reason is wrong. That all sounds pretty plausible. No objections so far, I'll bet. Now I'm going to claim that morality can't possibly come from somewhere else. So what I've just given you is not just part of one, a minimal source of morality. No, this is all of morality. You could derive everything from it, and you better, because it can't come from anywhere else. So let's see how this works. Suppose someone claims I have some additional source of further moral rules, which go beyond what you can get from the universalizability test. And someone says, for example, rape is wrong because I've chosen some text. Maybe it's a scripture, maybe it's a book published by some wise person, and the text says, "Dr. Don't rape." That's one of the many principles it gives, or orders or commands. And I'm going to follow that because my text tells me to follow it. Okay, well, first of all, this is clearly justified by at least one second order principle, and I'll call that one DW. Do whatever this chosen text requires. And then the first order instruction, don't rape, is just a consequence of that because that is one of the many commands found in that text. Okay, but also you've got to ask, well, why did I follow DW? I'm going to go through third order. Why do I value myself acting on DW? Well, it's got to be something like CT. Choose some text to get your moral values from. Now, immediately when I lay that out, a lot of you are going to say, oh, isn't that a really simplistic rule? I'll bet very few people would follow a rule like that. Well, we'll get to that. This is sort of the simplest toy version of how someone might justify a principle like DW. We'll see on the next page that if you try to make this more complex, it doesn't work either. But I'm first going to show that this simple one doesn't work. Now, here are the second and third order principles we're going to imagine this person following. DW, right away, there might be some problems with that. It might not be universalizable because maybe that text has some other commands that are not so good. Maybe it says don't rape. Okay, sounds like a good rule. It might also say you have to wear green hats. Okay, that's kind of weird. It might also say in another passage, better hurt those people who don't wear green hats. Make them wear green hats. That's pretty. You better check, in other words, that your text really is okay, and that this is all universalizable. And if it's not, then there's something wrong with your principle of following every command, every instruction that your text has. But it's worse than that. Even if DW is peachy keen, has only nice commands in it, nothing is non-universalizable there, there's a big problem because CT, the third order principle that you used to choose that text, because you thought, well, I need some text or other, I need some source of morality, so I'm going to pick this one. CT is not universalizable because it's very easy for other people to follow that and pick different texts. And their text might say, don't ever wear a green hat. Their text might even say, sometimes rape or kill people. They might even specifically say, harass and oppress the people who are following that text over there, which is yours. So there's all kinds of consequences that CT could have that you don't want it to have. Just like you don't want others to steal from you, so you better not steal yourself. You'd better not justify your following the text via CT because other people could do that and come up with very harmful results to you. Now, let's get back to this objection about CT. Someone's going to say, oh, Scott, this is a straw man. Nobody just picks a text at random or any old text, the first one that comes across to them, and follows that as a moral rule. They've got standards, right? They pick it for various reasons. Okay. Let's see how that's going to work. So let's say they have a modified version of CT. We'll call it CTF. Choose only text that is for your basis of morality or parts thereof. Maybe you pick and choose from a given text, and the ones you don't like, you explain away in various ways. But you only follow those texts or parts thereof that have feature F. Now, I haven't said exactly what feature F could be. It could be anything. It doesn't matter. It could be, it makes me feel nice. It sounds warm and fuzzy. It sounds like something my grandmother would say. It comes from the creator of the universe. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Maybe this new CTF is universalizable. Depends on what F is. But now the text has fallen out of the equation. The particular scripture that you said was the base of your morality, no, that's not the base anymore. Your morality is based on the fundamental principle that F is good, or a good-making feature of moral commands. And so now we got to ask the higher order question. Why do you pick F? Not why did you pick that text, but why did you pick F to be the basis for picking texts? And now we're off on a regress where we got to ask the question once again, why did you pick that one? And so we have what you claimed, in other words, your foundation of morality isn't anymore. Now, there's one escape clause for that, and that is if F is, I will only choose text whose commands are universalizable. That's great, but now, once again, the text has fallen out of the equation, and now you're back to agreeing with me on universalizability being the sole element or the sole foundation of morality. The only problem you have is if F is something other than that. And then you have this question about whether it's truly universalizable. And if it is, you'd better have a higher order principle justifying it. Now, I've started with this regress and this counterexample using appealing to a text, say a religious scripture. But exactly the same problem will arise if you claim that your morality comes from natural instincts or some theory about what is good or in conformity with evolutionary progress or success of the genes, or society, culture, my intuitions, whatever you name as your source. You're going to have exactly the same problem. Why that one? Why did you pick nature as opposed to society? Why did you pick your intuitions as opposed to culture? Why did you pick this culture instead of that culture? Why this subculture and not that other one? There's all these questions arise. You just said, well, I just picked it randomly. Now you're following a version of CT. If you said I picked it because it has some characteristic I like, now we're back to CTF. Why that characteristic? Is that universalizable? And once again, we're back to universalizability. Now, many of you at this point will be thinking, uh-oh, Scott, don't you see the looming problem here? Every philosopher sees the looming problem. An infinite regress. If you can always go higher order, if you can always ask the question, why did I follow that principle? Why did I value that? And you can go second order, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, 100th order. Whoa, never stops, right? But except it does stop. And this is what I proved in my dissertation 20 years ago. It was a little sloppy, so don't look it up. You won't learn anything more that you didn't learn here. But this is still the essence of my dissertation that I think is basically correct. That is the regress ends. And there's only one way to end it. It's not like you have choices here. It has to terminate in the highest order principle. First, notice that as you go into increasingly higher order principles, second, third, fourth order, the principles must become more general. That is the antecedent situation S that they use to justify valuing some response, including the adoption of some lower order principle, has to become more general. If it doesn't, if it just repeats the same thing, then you're not really going higher order. Then you're just repeating your third order principle and calling it a fourth order principle, but it's the same principle. So you're not going higher order. If your principles do get more general, then you gradually eliminate arbitrary contingencies. And when you do that, it ultimately has to converge upon a single, unique, highest order principle, which I call, for present purposes, egalitarian altruism. This requires you to value everyone's consistent values equally. Now, if someone's values are inconsistent, or yours turn out to be, you don't have to value those. But if they're consistent, you have to value them, respect them, let them be satisfied, possibly even contribute to their being satisfied. This principle has to govern all others. It's self-justifying. It values itself. So you can't go any higher. You don't need to go any higher order, and you can't go higher order. Because if you try to get more general than that, well, look at the antecedent condition. If somebody's values are consistent, then I will value and respect them. Oh, if you try to make that more general, try to make it more abstract, well, what could you do? You could say, well, I'll value even some inconsistent values. They don't have to be consistent. That's too picky. Well, that explodes in your face, right? Because now you're endorsing inconsistent values. That's not universalizable. So it has to stop here. There's no other place for it to go. And any violation of egalitarian altruism is non-universalizable, inconsistent. It's something that you couldn't approve of yourself doing. Now, I said I'd come back to the golden rule. I love the golden rule. Some philosophers, actually quite a few of them, hate it. They think it has very obvious counterexamples. Well, I don't think it actually has counterexamples, but it is ambiguous. And the counterexamples arise when you interpret the ambiguities the wrong way. So the simple phrase, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think this works pretty well, but here's the problem. Many of its words are ambiguous. Doing, what does that mean? Does that mean performing an external action like sticking your foot out to trip someone? Does it mean valuing, trying to trip someone, wanting to trip someone? Or does it mean following behavioral principle, tripping someone in some particular circumstance? You know, maybe tripping someone who's trying to kill someone else is a good thing. Tripping an innocent person is not. So it matters what situation you're replying to. How should we interpret doing? Is it which of these is the correct one? Others, again, there's an ambiguity, and same thing with would have. A lot of philosophers critique the idea of what I would have someone to do, because it sounds like I could do something that if others did it would satisfy any old whim I have. But maybe we need to restrict those things that would have things to those that would satisfy my consistent desires or values. Now, in each case, I've highlighted the last one in red, and that's because I think it's the right answer. But it's not the right answer because I say so. It's the right answer because just ask yourself, if you knew that other people were following the golden rule, how would you want them to interpret those ambiguities? How would you want them to disambiguate these ambiguous terms? Well, it's pretty easy to see that in each of these cases, you would not want them to follow the interpretations in black. You would want them to follow the interpretations in red. In other words, the golden rule is self-correcting. If there's a question about how to apply it, ask yourself, how would I want others to apply it? That tells you the answer. Apply the golden rule to itself, and now you know how to apply it and how to avoid these various counterexamples that people have to it. Now, and this is the last slide here, although there's a bit on it. You might then wonder if everyone can access second order valuation anytime and apply this universalizability test, why on the earth doesn't everybody do the right thing all the time? Why don't we always immediately access the correct morality and implement it? Why do things go wrong? Not just on other people, but sometimes all of us, we make moral mistakes at times. Well, when values are not universalizable, it's really easy to actually deceive ourselves about this by distracting attention from this fact. The easiest way to do it is just not to think about it. If thinking about what you're doing in a certain way would give you the realization that you couldn't approve of others doing it, then don't think that way. Just think of something else. Don't think about the fact that you don't want other people to steal your television set. Think about yourself watching the television set after you steal it. Focus on that, and easy peasy. No distractions, no worries, until someone forcefully reminds you in some way of the consequences of what you've implicitly approved of. A more sophisticated way of doing this is to redescribe your behavior so that it looks universalizable. You focus just on the parts of it that are universalizable and not the parts that aren't. This is what we call rationalization, giving a false or incorrect or incomplete reason to what you're doing, and disguising from yourself the fact that you are a hypocrite because you wouldn't want others to rationalize in that way. But again, if you distract yourself from that fact, you can just focus on the good things, not the bad parts of what you're doing, not the harmful parts. There are more sophisticated ways of doing this yet. If you have some kind of moral theory that bases your religion, bases your morality on a religious or social or some kind of biological source. And what these often do is they discourage us from asking the next higher order question, why should I follow that particular moral source? There's at least 3 methods they use for this. One is threaten you with punishment for asking the question. Okay, this is pretty explicit in some religious texts. Do not question the Lord or God. Do not put him to the test and so forth. Another way is to suggest that the question is impossible to ask or answer, even though it patently isn't. But you give hints and suggestions about why it might be impossible despite appearing to be possible. You might emphasize, for example, that we are so limited in our knowledge, so we have to rely upon someone, some being, some wiser person than ourselves who knows so much more about morality, who is not infected with sin, who is not biased, not selfish, and so forth. Even though, in fact, of course, we can often recognize when we are biased, when we are selfish, and put that into doubt. But if you emphasize the fact that, look, we're just hopelessly gone, there's no way we can truly get rid of our bias, then you might be tempted to think that we shouldn't even ask the question because we're always going to answer it wrong. Finally, you can focus on moral values that we just tend to accept naturally, either because people around us are accepting it, it's part of our biological nature, or for whatever other reason we have an intuition that it's right. And I gave an example of that several slides back when I used the example of rape is wrong. Okay, if you're like me, you have a visceral reaction to that. Oh, yeah, of course it's wrong. That's terrible. I don't even want to begin to go down that road of thinking that it might possibly be right in some circumstance. Well, if someone can convince you that, look, my moral text says that rape is wrong, and it's absolute about it, and totally wrong, then that's a little bit of a count in favor of that text. And you might confuse the question of whether rape is always wrong with the question of whether the text that says rape is always wrong is correct and a good moral source. Again, you'd better check the other parts of the text, see if it's agreeing with you and is universalizable in other respects, not just the few that it's emphasizing at the moment. Well, that concludes my talk, so I'm going to then open it for questions, and thank you for listening.
Thank you much, Scott. Very interesting presentation. I had a couple comments / questions in the chat. George Free asked early on, is moral culpability the same as intent?
Is moral culpability the same as intent? If intent means that there's a valuational component, then yes. Now, we just have to be careful here because people might use the word intent in various ways. Like we might say, going back to one of my cases, let's see if I still, let me go back to that. Oh, how do I go back?
Well, stop your screen share, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, did I
stopped it.
Oh, you stopped it, okay.
Lovely face.
Do we have that back again now?
Not yet, you need to restart.
I need to click on my end, and how do I, okay, there we go. Well, look, I don't necessarily need to do that. As long as I see it, I'll remind myself of what I was talking about. So the case of B tripping A, okay, we might say that in 2 of the cases where B tried to trip A, he was intending to trip A, but in case 5, B only wanted A to trip, didn't intend, that is, he didn't intend his actions to be the cause of A's tripping. So someone might say that intent is lacking in case 5. Now, of course, it's true that one kind of intent is lacking, the intention to cause A to trip through your own activity. And that is indeed why the other cases where he does have that intention are worse than the case where he just mentally thinks to himself, God, I hope that guy trips and falls. Still, there's one thing that B did intentionally do there, and that is that he did intend to have the desire that A tripped. He does at least implicitly value himself, think of himself as a good person, or at least not the worst person in the world, for having to have that desire that A trip. And that is wrong. Now, of course, he might do that as he thinks, oh, that's a wrong thing. I guess I really shouldn't want that. I still want it. I wish I didn't, but I do. But then of course, he's making a moral judgment of himself. And the judgment is that I am intentionally, we might also say knowingly, consciously wanting A to trip. It's not just this, it's not like I don't know. It's not like I just read the words on the piece of paper that have nothing to do with me. A should trip. It's in my head. I'm wanting it. I'm the one doing it. So as long as we count that as an intentional action, even if it's just an internal action, then I would say yes. Intention is what we are judging in a moral as moral culpability.
Okay, thank you. Had a question from Eric asking if you give some examples. This was on the slide where you were talking about egalitarian altruism.
Okay. Okay, and what is the question about it?
Can you give some examples?
Oh, okay. Well, not stealing. If you know, if someone's got a television set and they're counting on using it, and assuming that and this is a big assumption, which maybe we want to question, but assuming that the economic system by which that person got the right to a TV set, got assigned a legal justification for it as his property, as long as we assume that that is morally acceptable, that is universalizable, then my stealing from him would be out of conformity with the egalitarian altruism, and my letting him use it would be an example of it. My agreeing to my fulfilling my promises. If I say, I'll pay you, $20 an hour for some work so that maybe later you can buy a TV set and keep it, and then following through with that, paying you what I promised to do it. That's egalitarian altruism, because if I reject that, then I'm saying, if I say, no, I don't have enough money, I'm only going to pay you $10 an hour, and now that you've done the work, I'm counting my interests as more important than yours just because they're mine, not for any good universalizable reason that I could want anyone else to act on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could go on, but I think a lot of these are really straightforward. There might be more difficult questions about how to act, but I think the general idea of respecting other people the way you'd want to respect them, there's millions of examples that they're the part of common sense morality.
Nina had a comment here along those lines, I think. Chimpy versus bonobo-ish cultures. Bonobos are altruistic, chimps are genocidal.
From what I've heard, that there's a great deal of truth to that. And that is exactly among the reasons why a principle of getting your morality from evolution, from biological instincts, is not a very good idea. Now, some people say, well, what we've got to decide is, are we more like bonobos or chimpanzees? Well, look, we're not like either, because unlike them, we can make higher order judgments. We're not just slaves to our instincts. We can look at our instincts and first of all notice, I've got some bonobian instincts and I've got some chimpanzeesian instincts. Which one do I want to follow? Well, whichever one is more universalizable. I think it's pretty obvious the bonobian way of life is more universalizable. Is it perfect? Well, we can get in the details of that, but it's better than the chimp one. It's closer to universalizability than the other one. Well, that's the one I should act upon, but not because it's closer to my instincts, not because those instincts are more powerful than the other ones. I can choose which ones to act upon. We've all got a mixture of these. We've got a mixture of self-interested and other directed goals. We shouldn't say, well, we should act on whichever ones are more natural. No, they're both natural. That doesn't solve the question. Which one is universalizable?
Mm-hmm. Bob, I'm pushing in the room from Bob. Bob, come up and take the microphone so people can hear you online.
Okay.
And then introduce yourself.
Bob Bosca.
Bob?
Isn't there still a problem with priorities if you have a set of moral principles, which one takes effect? The classical example is about if you have a train that's going towards one person versus three people and you can change it, but the one person is your mother or your brother, that would involve making a decision of what's right based on the priority, say a priority of loyalty versus minimizing suffering.
Now we get to a hard case. Okay. So I can throw lots of easy examples of consequences from the egalitarian altruism. You've plunged to the hard case. This is called the trolley problem. It's been talked about for over 50 years by many philosophers, although it first came up in a text almost 100 years ago. Kind of obvious once you start thinking about trains and having trains around. And the classical problem is, saving 5 people versus 1, but 3 works as well too. By the way, if anyone's seen the what's the series? The good place. Yes, yes. They exemplify that and use it as a moral test. So it's a tough one, okay, because many people, if all the 6 people are strangers, you know, and the trolleys or the train is going towards the 5 people, and you could switch to one stranger so that they die instead of the 5, a lot of people hesitate. It's like, oh, because now I'm not just letting them die. If I turn the switch, I am killing that person, and that feels a little bit worse than letting 5 people die, because then you can say it's the train's fault. But is it? Because if you could turn the switch and you don't, it kind of is your fault that those people die if you're the only one standing in the way of their deaths. Well, there's a lot of debate about whether, you know, this difference between killing and letting die matters, or doing versus letting happen more generally. It's a difficult question, but and it's further complicated if you have like personal loyalties. Like you suggested that, you know, maybe the one is a family member or a close friend. Then we're a little more inclined to think we owe it to that person. Okay. On the other hand, ask yourself if you could have been any one of the 6, or if your friend could have been any one of the 6, and you don't know which one they are. You don't just know they're one of the 6 on the track. They're either on the first track the trolley's going to hit if you don't pull the lever, or they might be the one person on the side track, and they have an equal chance of being in either. They have an equal chance, that is, of being one of the 6, not an equal chance of being on one track or the other. Well, they're 5 times more likely to be on the first track, right? So if you are loyal to your friend, even if that is a dominant value, which one are you going to want to choose? Pretty clearly, you're going to want to pull the lever, which is the same thing that a mere mathematical calculation poses. Now, that does not mean that this is an easy choice. And if someone found themselves paralyzed and they couldn't do it, I think a lot of us would find that understandable. On the other hand, the moral mathematics of it is fairly clear. And by the way, it was pointed out, I think it's Mo Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, 2,000 years ago. And I only discovered this recently, that he discovered this, that he addressed something like this, because he was promoting a universalizable ethic, that everyone's interests should act equally. And of course, the Confucian view, dominant at that time, said, oh, loyalty to family, society, friendship, these personal ties come first and should dominate your attention to the interests of strangers. And Mo Tzu said, yeah, okay, but I understand that. But look, suppose you have to go off on a journey and you have to leave your family behind, and you have to hire a servant, a warrior, some kind of guardian to watch over them. Are you going to hire the guardian who thinks your way, that his family, his friends matter most, his life matters most? Or are you going to hire someone who is going to think about the interest of the greater numbers, and might then sacrifice his own life to save your 5 family members if they are threatened? He says, precisely because you love your family members, you're going to want to choose the guy who's a little bit more altruistic and egalitarian, because that's going to lead to the greater good, and that's going to protect your family. So be careful when you talk about the idea of a personal attachment overriding the rights of strangers. Ask yourself, do you really want to do that? By the way, there's an interesting meme I saw on the internet a few months ago of a guy waking up, and he's what's going on? He finds himself tied to a railroad track, and a guy next to him is tied up, and he says, where am I? Oh, you're in the trolley problem. And he says, oh, I thought I was going to be the guy pulling the switch. And the other one says, no, that's somebody else. Now, which do you want them to do? Okay, different scenario.
So, thank you. We have a comment here from Risa and Laird. They state, my sense is that most of morality is prerequisite to the choice to live around other people.
Can't hear you, Don.
Okay. Sorry?
I can see the question, and I can see if I can read it better. My sense is that morality is a prerequisite to the choice to live around other people. I think there's a great deal to be said for that. It's interesting that there's a school of philosophy, school of ethical theory called contractarianism, which says that morality comes from a not necessarily explicit, but an implicit contract or agreement that we make with other people when we are with them in a group. Now, you might say, hey, I've never signed a contract. I didn't make up these rules. But some of the contractors will say you kind of did, because you could have moved to Antarctica. You could have killed yourself. You could have stopped eating and let yourself die. You chose to stay here in some sense or other. And even if those other things are difficult, you could have at least gone to Montana. You could hole up somewhere and minimize your contact with other people. You have chosen to live with other people. And how are you best going to do that? Probably using universalizable rules. That's the ones you'd want those people to follow if they stick around your area. So I think this brings us back to universalizability.
Hey, had another comment here from Eugene. Can you comment on whether artificially intelligent agents can develop a moral sense and whether they would arrive at egalitarian altruism as a universal principle?
If I am correct in the rest of my argument, the answer is yes and yes. Because if they were truly intelligent, if they're intelligent like we are intelligent, they would engage in higher order thought and higher order valuation. And they would be able to take it recursively. And as I said, you can program this into electrical engineering circuits. You can do this in silicon. I'm hearing a lot of typing. Somebody's.
I got it. Oh, no.
You're muted.
Okay, back. Okay, now it's just me again. Yeah, I mean, you can instantiate this in silicon or copper wires easily. Just do the loops. Oh, and by the way, when neurologists have examined our brains, the upper cortex full of feedback loops, lots and lots of feedback loops. We don't know what each one of them individually use, but there's no question that a great deal of what makes us unique from all other animals is these feedback loops in our brain. And given that we have feedback loops in our minds that are visibly, consciously examining ourselves, it's probably that the two are related. Well, again, we can easily instantiate that into physical circuits, so there's no reason we couldn't. And if they did, again, assuming my argument is correct, these artificial intelligences, they might be very different from us in their first order values. You know, we have a lot of first order values that come from our biological upbringing. We have sexual drives, we have emotional drives, we have instinctive self-preservation. Though the AI agents may or may not have some of those. They might have different ones. We might program differently first order or impulsive values into them. But the capacity to examine whatever values they start with and ask, should I follow these? Should I make this one a priority over that one? And so forth. Could I value other agents, whether artificial or biological, following the same principles I'm thinking of following? They can ask those same questions and come up with basically the same answers.
Okay, we have another question two questions in the room. So Bob and then Frank.
Yeah, my question has to do with how contextuality fits into it. Because when you say universality, is that all people would agree under any circumstance, or some people would agree under all circumstances, or all people would agree under all the same circumstances?
Okay, well, first of all, it would not involve the phrase all people would agree. I would take that phrase out, because the question is not whether people actually do agree with you. It's whether, if they did that, would you be okay with that? Maybe everyone in the world rejects your principles. That's not the issue. The question is, if they adopted your principles, would you be okay with that? So it's the hypothetical is on you, not on them. And it's not everyone, definitely not. You did say in at least one or two of your formulations, everyone. I would not say everyone. And this is a very contentious point in philosophical ethics. It's another area I've been working on very heavily. The question of what exactly do we mean by universalizability? Some philosophers interpret that as being, what would happen if everybody followed your principles? And I think that's completely wrong-headed. That's not the right question to answer. The question to answer is, what if anybody followed the principles you're proposing to act on? So not everyone at once necessarily. Maybe what if just Tom did it? What if just Dick did it? What if just Harry did it? What if Tom and Harry did it together? What if 7 people did it, but the others did? I mean, it could be any combination. You'd better be okay with any such combination. And that's a much stronger constraint, because take one principle. This is my favorite one. The principle, and again, principle of general valuation principle is like taking some context and responding to it with some valuation. So here's the context. When I want to get somewhere and I have a car, my response is that I will value myself doing, drive on the left side of the road to get to my destination. Okay. What if everybody did that? Yeah, sounds great. That'd be fine. What if some people did that when not everybody else is doing that? Very, very bad. Okay. So you don't want to ask what would happen if everybody did it. You want to ask what would happen if anyone picked at random did it? What would happen if you did it? What would happen if your neighbor did it? Just because it'd be fine if everybody did it doesn't mean that you are okay in going outside right now and doing that. That would be a very bad idea. And that forces more constraints, more restrictions on your principle. It can't be just whenever I want to get somewhere, I will drive on the left side of the road. You'd better add to that qualification and the general rule that people are following in my area is to drive on the left side of the road. Then it's okay to drive on the left. If they're all driving on the right, then you should drive on the right. If they're doing both, you better stay off the road until they figure this thing out. Okay, so it's a stronger constraint. That's my answer.
Okay, we have one more. We have another question in the room from Frank.
I'm very troubled by your case number 5, where B was merely thinking he'd like to see A trip. Because my view of things is that morality is about what we do, how we behave toward other people, not what we think. There's a certain person I wish would die. A, because I feel that he's a bad person, and B, because I believe the world would be better.
And we know who you mean.
I would take a shrewd guess that I would, I probably agree on the person you're thinking of. There are, or even if we differ, there are such people that we all occasionally have thoughts about. Of course, it does matter who that person is, right? You know, if the person that we wish died was a tyrant, a harmful person in the world, then wishing that they die is not necessarily a bad thing. See, in my scenario, B and A were strangers, and B was just, maybe B was just having a bad day and wished other people would share in his misery and not go by him happy-go-lucky like the world is okay. He had schadenfreude. That's a bad motivation. That's a bad reason to want somebody to trip and fall. But if you see a Nazi running past you, trying to persecute people, wanting them to trip, possibly even acting to trip them, but certainly wanting them to trip and hoping that they trip, that's fine. I have no problem with that. If you see a good Samaritan running down the road trying to help somebody out of a ditch, wanting them to trip is a terrible thing, even if you don't do anything about it. So the context matters enormously. And if other people want other people to trip who are doing harm to the world, I say glory to them. Nothing wrong with that. And in some cases, perhaps they should even act on it. Now, there are certainly times when it would be justified to want someone to suffer harm, but unjustified to actively bring it about. This is getting to a much more complicated issue of morality. There are some, and things matter. In fact, my paper on poetic justice and the golden rule and revenge is on that a little bit. It's in the forget what journal it is. You can look it up. I address some questions along those lines because I give the example of a tyrant. You know, there might be a tyrant, a dictator who does terrible things to a country. And it would be better for everybody if that person just had a heart attack and keeled over. It might not be better for everybody if somebody shoots the bastard. Why? Well, not because he's dead and he doesn't deserve to die. No, he deserves to die. But maybe that might set off a cycle of reprisals, of one coup after another, whoever happens to be closest to the reins of power seizing it. And now the country is worse off, and it takes a century to get out of this terrible cycle of violence, when if we just waited another 10 years, the guy would have keeled over in a heart attack, and maybe that would have been better. That's a tough answer to hear in some cases, but maybe it's true. And that therein lies a grounds for a distinction between condemning someone for, or making a judgment of when someone wants someone to suffer harm and when they actively do it. We might need better reasons for the latter than for the first in many cases.
Thank you. We have a question from Suzanne online. Suzanne, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Scott. I love your thoughts, but that is probably why they invented religion, to stop you from being bad to the people. Even if the people are bad and doing horrible things, it's not right to do bad things. Even if everybody hates that person, even if he kills everybody in his country. I mean, these are very philosophical questions, but no. And when someone like you says, well, maybe it would be better if we let that guy kill everybody, then all the other agreeable people out there, they go like, oh yeah, maybe that would be better. You know, I don't even have to think about anything. I can just let him make the decisions for me and go along with it.
Okay, well, I think I would suggest that we need to make some distinctions. I didn't say that it's always better to let the dictator die a natural death. I said in some cases it could be. It kind of depends on how bad things are, right? I mean, take a straightforward case. We'll do the reductio ad Hitler, as they call it. There's a joke among philosophers because we talk about reductio ad absurdum, reducing an argument to absurdity. And then someone said, hey, I noticed a lot of people are using the reductio ad Hitler when you want an extreme case, reducing your argument to Hitler. Take Hitler. Okay, I think it would have been better for everybody involved if one of the many assassination attempts on Hitler had succeeded. And I commend those who did it at great risk to their lives. He was doing things so bad that even if innocent bystanders or relatively innocent bystanders, there weren't a whole lot of innocent people standing next to Hitler most of the days. But even if some bystanders got killed, it would have been worth killing Hitler because what he was doing was so bad. But not every dictator is as bad as Hitler. And even some who are bad, again, it might you might get replaced by a worse guy. I mean, some people, I don't know if this is true, but some people have said, for example, this about Putin.
Well, maybe, so that is why we as human beings, with all of these thoughts and possibilities in our brain, have said, wait. We need overseers to make sure that somebody like Scott doesn't start making everybody think they should kill all those people. Because I mean, Hitler's a horrible guy. And my father was in World War II. And then at some point, I don't know, 15 years ago, people started saying, maybe we shouldn't have dropped that bomb. That was a horrible thing. And maybe we shouldn't have done that. And my father wrote a letter to each of us saying, wait. I heard this point of view. We needed to drop the bomb. I was there. I was around. I experienced all these problems. And it's the context that makes it all very important. So later on in history, the context is very, very important. And And that's why I think it's good that we as human beings are trying to like make rules that keep everybody in line so that you don't just go around tripping all those people that you think you want to because they're bad. Because so it was a lovely talk. I thank you. Very thought-provoking.
Okay, well, let me respond to that then. I'm a little bit confused actually about your position, Susanna, because you seem to be critiquing me in some cases. You seem to be defending not only not just killing dictators, but in some cases dropping bombs upon many people that we know are, at least relatively speaking, innocent, even if they're paying taxes to a horrible regime and supporting it in a very general way. And so you sometimes seem to be okay with using violence against people. And I'd agree with you on that case. I mean, that's like a very complicated case, but I would agree with you that there are some cases where the harm of the evildoers is so great that it's worth not only killing the evildoers, but even risking some harm to bystanders in order to stop that very great evil. And so actually, I completely agree that context is everything. It all depends on the context. And the worst thing in the world, I think, in morality is to oversimplify your principles and say, look, here's some typical examples of killing, and look, they're wrong, so killing must always be wrong. Or to look at some typical examples of fighting against evil and saying, oh, look, it's good to fight against people as evil as Hitler, so it's always good to drop bombs on people who are causing us harm and hitting bystanders. No, the details matter enormously. I would absolutely insist upon that. And so I'm not sure that we're actually disagreeing on particular cases. Yeah,
we're not disagreeing.
Okay, well then we're great.
But we can only decide we're right for ourselves. It really isn't fair for us to decide that we are right for other people. I mean, if they want to follow their book and their book says this and that, who are we to decide that their book is wrong?
Okay, and why don't I answer that, and then we can see if there's other questions. But that gets back to my slide where I asked where's the source of morality? Where does it come from? And I said it comes from anyone capable of making a consistent higher order judgment and actually doing it the right way. Okay, it's kind of like mathematics. I mean, if you ask, who gets to decide what is mathematically correct? In one sense, nobody. There's no person in the world who, if they say what 2 + 2 equals, that they're right no matter what they say. No, it's not up to anybody. But in another sense, it's up to anyone who does it the right way. So no matter what your credentials are, if you say 2 + 2 = 5, no, it just doesn't. But if you think it through properly, if you follow the right procedure, 2 + 2, and you work it out to being 4, you could be the dumbest person in the world in every other respect. But if you do that procedure right, you get the right answer. So anyone can do it. So in a sense, you've got something right, that we all have to decide this for ourselves. There's no one who can magically give us the right answer. On the other hand, part of the right answer we have to come up with is making judgments about other people's judgments. And sometimes they can be wrong, grievously wrong. And if their book says, if they say, I've worked this out and I think I should follow this book that says, kill the people who aren't wearing green hats, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You've done it the wrong way. And I'm going to fight you because I've done it the right way. And I see that I may be confused about a lot of things, but that rule is wrong. And I'm going to fight you on it. But let's see what other questions are.
Hey, Scott, I have 2 people in the room and 2 people online. How much more time do you have?
I got tons of time.
Okay, so quick, Bev, very quick, because
what I say is when you see somebody doing something wrong or whatever against your values, make a lemonade out of lemons, turn it around to make it right by your actions of who and what you do in life. Just like what we're talking about was just gentleman's comment is, let's say a person's running for office or something and you don't like them, turn it around and vote for the other person. Be an activist and showing people why you feel the way you do.
okay, thank you.
That sounds pretty universal. Quick, I have very little to say. That sounds pretty universalizable to me.
Yeah, if your friend's going to drive drunk, take away the keys. If your friend's committing genocide, pull the weapons. Don't just feed him more weapons. I mean, be a friend, not a. There are rules. There are rules, even in war, which is considered fundamentally immoral. There are rules that we have agreed upon, and we ought to play by them. But that's another question. My issue was really with my impression of morality is that it's basically habit, that we don't think about it. I don't need to think about the fact that we just take turns in asking questions. We do. I'm not going to grab the microphone from somebody. There is we just instinctively do it. I think that we make moral decisions continuously all day long because it makes it possible for us to live together. I don't do a positive intervention stop, which rolls somebody else's car over every time somebody cuts me off, but there are police officers who do. I mean, there are people who get out of control with their stuff. The question, the issue that I have is that a lot of what we think of as morality it's a model that we develop after the fact. And it's a model that we might use in developing public policy, for example. And it's useful in those contexts. But in a day-to-day sense, it's more like muscle memory. That it isn't logical, it isn't rational, it's simply part of our muscle memory of being social animals. And I wonder if you comment on that.
Yes, actually, there's a great deal of truth in what you're saying, especially when it's properly qualified. And you did say towards the end, it's something like it's more of a matter or mostly a matter of habit. Yes, that doesn't mean it's 100% a question of habit. We do, again, have the capacity to evaluate our habits, to look at our habits and ask ourselves, is this really a habit I approve of in myself and hence implicitly in others? We might have thought so because you were focusing on one aspect of your habits. And then you might have some experience and go, oh, you know what? I'm not sure that this habit is working out so well for me and perhaps for other people as I thought it was. Maybe I should modify it. That doesn't mean throwing it all out, although sometimes we do have complete changes of life. Sometimes we have to radically reevaluate our position and say, I've been wrong for many years in this one thing I've been doing or this way I was looking at the world. I need to reform. You need to stop drinking. You need to, stop rejecting this person, or I need to take this other person out of my life that I've been relying upon because it's not doing me good or it's not doing them good. It's a crutch or whatever. We do that. And sometimes it's much more modest than that. We just do a little tweak in what we're doing. And when you say, we naturally do this, well, I'm not so sure it's natural. And if it were, that again wouldn't by itself settle the question of whether it was right, whether we could make a higher order approval of it and agree with that, continuing to do that particular natural thing. I don't know about you, but I actually distinctly remember when I was a young kid, must have been at least 4 years old, sitting in the car with my younger brother in the back seat, and I was doing something to him. I don't know what it was. My mom looked back and said, how'd you like it if someone did that to you? And I was like, oh, 4 years old. And it suddenly occurred to me, oh, I guess I wouldn't like that. I don't know if I'd never heard the golden rule before, but there it was. And it struck me, and I stopped persecuting my brother. And then 30 years later, I developed that to my moral theory and a dissertation. But I think we do have these experiences. Little kids can be pretty mean, actually. They are naturally very selfish. And I think we only gradually become more altruistic. Now, is that partly from biology, or our genes kicking in later that didn't kick in before? Or is that a process of socialization and engaging in higher order thinking that gradually corrects our self-interested selfishness into something that's a little more altruistic? I think it's more the latter, but even if it's partly the former, the latter gives the stamp of approval to that process and helps it along. So I would just modify that. But yeah, if we had to think about everything all the time, whether it's instrumental or moral, yeah, we'd be tied up. I don't think every time I want to drive a nail into a board, should I use the hammer or the screwdriver? Let me work this out. No, you do what you've done before because it worked. Same thing with moral questions. But every once in a while, we run across a complicated or something that makes us question what we did before, and then we have to think more carefully. And that's what moral theory can do.
Okay, we have a few more people online with questions for you, Fika. I hope I said your name close enough.
You did. Thank you very much. It's Faika.
Fika, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Lovely meeting everyone, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. A question that I have, I was here from the beginning, I was listening, but what made me actually sit down from the housework and listen more closely was when I heard the idea that, we can wish death on certain individuals because we believe that this particular individual is not good for my country or for my nation. And of course, my question is, do you think morality is absolute or is it relative? Where do you draw the line where and when I can wish
I don't know.
when I can wish death on someone or a nation or people of particular group? Because when we look at the real world, everyone beside myself and people that I love, people that agree with me, would probably be wearing a green hat. So do I have the right to think that now I can wish death upon everyone because everyone's wearing a green hat? The reason why I say that is because we don't stop at wishing death for a certain person, certain individual. Why don't we do that? Because one is that we have, as human beings, we have limitations. My limitations as a person is that I would care more than anyone for my own family, for people that I love, for people that are close in my mindset and all those things. So all different levels. Another part to that story is that I, as a human being, again, am very, very influenced by so many different elements in my life. These elements could be the religion that I'm born into, the culture that I'm born into, and in today's world, media, social media. It's absolutely crazy. It's really mad, the influence that social media has on people. So when I'm so when I live in such situation, do you think I can move on and say, you know what, I can wish death on certain people around the world and I'm justified for that? Again, when can I stop that? I have to tell you, I'm from Afghanistan. I was born in Afghanistan. And every day I hear people telling me it's okay to have people of Afghanistan starved. It's okay to have them killed because my media tells me that people of Afghanistan are terrorists and they're just bad people. So when does my morality become somewhat more of something that I could use towards becoming more humane towards others in my life rather than becoming a hateful person, and thinking about not really expanding my knowledge, not expanding my ideas, my understanding of what the realities of kindness, compassion, humanity in the real world is actually like. So thank you very much. That was too long.
Oh, no, that was excellent. Fika? Sorry, Fika, okay. That was a very good and very sophisticated question with a very complex answer. That's a good question. I don't have a simple answer. In fact, if I had a simple answer, I think I'd be a bad person, because that requires so much, as we said in response to an earlier question, context matters, and there's so many complexities in the context, so many different things that can shape us, that any simple answer to that is wrong. That doesn't mean that the answer is never either. That's a simple answer that some people might say, well, it's so complicated, I better go for the simplest possible answer. Well, that's going to be wrong too in some cases. I would say that many of the things that you raise are extremely important things to think about, especially the fact that we even if we are general, even if we think of ourselves, and even right in thinking that we are basically good people, we're on the right side, you know, we're the nice people, as opposed to those others over there. Even if that's true, we can go down the wrong road with our own bias, our self-interested inclinations towards supporting our own group and our own way of thinking. And you're right that social media goes crazy with this. You know, I'm probably like a lot of you in the room. I'm going to take a wild guess that a lot of us are kind of, you know, liberal, democratic. We're, you know, and small d, little, big D, perhaps both. And we're kind of, you know, yeah, we like less tyranny, and we like more international cooperation, and we like more diversity. And I'm like that. And I fell into the hole of social media a couple of years ago when there was that incident in Washington, D.C. Some of you might remember this, where there was some kind of a rally, and this one kid was looking like he was sneering at a Native American. And he wasn't. The postings came up, and we were all invited to do the 5-minute hate on this guy, like out of 1984, and see this person as despicable. And we were wrong. We fell into this hole of, here's what our side does. Here's someone who's worthy of our hate. And we were misled, perhaps an innocent mistake, but hopefully we became more conscious of this, how we can fall into this trap of thinking that everybody who gives the lip service to our side is doing and saying the right thing, and we're leading to the right road. That should give us grave pause whenever we are tempted to think that person should be socially ostracized, even more so when we think that person ought to die. We should have our facts in order. We should take that step very gravely. That does not mean we should never take it. Hitler, pretty easy example. Okay, if you don't think we should have wished Hitler dead, if you don't think we should even have taken some active measures to kill him, if there were any practical, I mean, if I was living in 1940 in Iowa, there's not much I could have done to make Hitler dead. But those people who were in a position, if I don't approve of that, I think there's something wrong with me. But he is an easy case. That's why we philosophers laugh about the reductio ad Hitler, because it's bringing in the big gun, the ultimate, the extreme example. Not everything is as clear as Hitler. Probably not even the other person that many of us in the room are thinking about. Okay, there are harder cases. And there are more subtle ways of also thinking about the question of what is our response. I mean, Mark Twain is famous for the quote, you know, I've never wished a man dead, but I've read many an obituary with great satisfaction. Okay, that's a little bit more moderate, but still it's a valuation. And it'll be a wrong valuation in some cases, but maybe right in others. So that's about all I can probably say, is that these are very difficult cases, but the questions you raise about the potential for self-bias, even when you are generally a good person, is very real. And we should always be on guard about that. That doesn't mean we need to be thinking about it 24 hours of the day, but we should think about it once in a while and check ourselves and listen to others around us and see. I mean, of course, we could be in a loop where we're all agreeing on the same thing and have enforce the same biases. We should try once in a while to listen to other people who think differently. And maybe we think they're wrong, but maybe they won't be sometimes. Maybe we should listen to alternative views. That's the best we can do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sherry had been trying to ask a question. I had not seen her waving her hand at me. Sherry, are you there? Can you have a question?
No.
No? Okay. Then Risa and Laird, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Unmute. Okay. Hi. Scott, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. These are things we all think about. Any thinking person thinks about, you know, what's right, what's wrong, what's the nature of our decision-making process. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's also the corollary of don't do unto others what is hateful to yourself. We're in a really weird political situation where the country's very polarized. Both sides use the same rhetoric. They both say those people are wrong. They're going to destroy the universe. We have to stand up for ourselves and make them stop doing what they're doing. Both sides. The questions of abortion and gay and trans rights and banning books, and there's so many things going on that are upsetting, and it all does come down to morality. They're following their book. Their book says this is bad, okay? And so they want to stop everyone from doing that thing that they think is bad because of the book they've misinterpreted. And our side is doing the things we think are right based on our own thinking and morality, which stems from, as you pointed out, all these different places. So who decides? I hear you saying, well, that's right, I'd agree with that. But are you the final word on what's right and what's wrong? No, everyone has to decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong. It goes back, we think, to, we've talked about this a lot, about primitive days where, you know, if you wanted to protect yourself from the saber-toothed tiger, and the only way to do it is to go inside a cave and roll a big rock over the door, the opening of the cave while you sleep so the tiger can't eat you, and you can't move the rock alone, you need another person. So you get that other person, but you have to be sure that that person isn't going to kill you and eat you during the night. So you make this agreement. We'll roll the rock together, we'll both be safe, but at the same time, we agree, we have a contract. We're not going to kill and eat each other during the night. And for me, that's where morality stems from. That, call it society, call it living with other people. Yes, if you live all alone in Montana, you can behave however you want. But if you have another person right there, then you have to behave in a way that works with that person. So I think morality grows from society, from the contract we have with other people. I won't kill you, you won't kill me. I won't take your stuff, you won't take my stuff. I won't abuse you, you won't abuse me. And yeah, that comes down to the golden rule, don't do unto others. It goes to the corollary, do unto others. If our intentions are such, but we don't act on them, is that immoral? Frank asked that question earlier. I was reminded of Jimmy Carter lusting in his heart. I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking anything. We're not the thought police. We can think whatever we want. But how we behave is what matters. What we do is what matters. So I don't know if it's a question or just a lot of comments. This was entirely worthwhile, thought-provoking, and thank you. It's really interesting to hear all the viewpoints on where morality comes from. So I think that's everything. Just wanted to say those things.
Well, let me make, thank you, Risa. Let me make at least two comments. First of all, I mean, in general, I think a lot of the things you said, I generally agree to. At least the middle part, when you said we make this contract with other people, an agreement to live by, so that we can cooperatively satisfy our goals. Well, yeah, that is what we should do, because doing that is universalizable. That's what you'd want the other guy to do: make a contract with you and live up to it. So that follows perfectly. Now, you in the beginning, you raised a question about you know, there are two sides that are fiercely competing each other using much of the same rhetoric. How do we decide between them, and are we equivalent? Well, you're right to point out parallels, and there are parallels. You know, like I admitted in the last question, I, as moral as I try to be, I was deceived by social media. I fell into the pit of you know, the bandwagon mentality. Agree with what everyone else agrees with you, who you think agrees with you on other things, and that was the wrong thing to do. And I can't just say they started it. No, I was part of it. I fell into that. I need to be more careful. No, but as far as, you know, we also shouldn't make the danger of saying, oh, because some of the things each side is saying sound structurally similar, then they're equally right. No, they're not equally right.
Find people on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, racism is worse than anti-racism. Okay. Using violence to overthrow the government is worse most of the time, unless you have a very, very bad government like Nazi Germany. But if you're not that bad, using violence to overthrow a government is worse than letting the democratic procedures operate. peacefully, and so forth. These are meaningful differences. And anyone who says, yeah, but you have your own view and I and mine. No, my facts are better in some cases. And if they aren't, tell me why, explain, and talk to me. So there are these meaningful differences. And then there was something at the very end that you said that I wanted to comment on too, and I lost it. What was the very last thing? I thought it was important.
About intention versus action.
Intent. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so back to, you suggested at one point that any thought you have, we're not police of our thoughts. Sometimes thoughts do come unbidden to us. And this is actually a very heavily debated issue in morality. It goes back to Aristotle. He distinguished between the person who had a bad thought and controlled it versus the person who didn't have any bad thoughts in the first place. And he said, yeah, it's better to have a bad thought and control it than to have a bad thought and act on it, but better still to not have the bad thought in the first place. And I think he had a point, even though I think that most difference what matters most is what actually happens or is likely to happen as a result of what you do. But thoughts do sometimes influence behavior, sometimes in ways you might not expect, sometimes not in immediate ways. I think that if someone were to have the passing thought, oh, maybe Hitler's genocide wasn't that bad, at least he was trying to accomplish something. Even if they don't act on that immediately, I mean, how would they act? They're not going to go back in a time machine and support Hitler. But even that passing thought, there's something wrong with you, and maybe it won't cause you to harm people at that moment or the next day or the day after, but maybe down the road, you might be a little bit more inclined to support or allow a different dictator to do something that you shouldn't. So even a risk of that happening, that I think is the basis. Now, if we could have thoughts, if you have thoughts and it's impossible for you to act on, well, then it's just like a passing hypothetical. You could see written in a story, someone thought Hitler wasn't that bad, or you could write it on a sheet of paper without any intention to actually believe in it. That's different. Okay, then you're just talking about propositions in the abstract. If you actually feel that, there's some conceivable case where that could translate into action. That's not as bad as the one where it translates into immediate action, but it's not as good as not having that thought at all. So I think there is a place to critique our thoughts, even if they do not immediately translate to action. So that's what I say.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Sherry / AKA Fred, you're here. Can you talk? You have a question for our speaker?
I have.
Oops, she's silenced there.
You're muted, Sherry.
How do you like it now?
Can
you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Scott, I very much appreciated all the corners that you kind of dusted off in our guilt-ridden path. Part of me would love to know what things you do that you think are immoral and why, but I won't ask that.
Yeah, put me on the spot there.
I think that, having a background in a lot of humanities, in my actions and my education, and just, thought process, I think that morality and ethics come from compassion and empathy. I think that it is to some extent genetically determined. I think that it is also experientially. I think it is also nurtured and to some extent hardwired. Examples are, and somebody mentioned Hitler, that, you have Hitler and you have Mother Teresa. These are people that had very different paths in their actions and how they treated and interacted with humanity. So to that, I would say that some of it is predetermined, perhaps. There are chemical imbalances. You have some people that are, sociopaths. But what was I going to say? I think environment plays a big role. You were talking about rape being wrong. Yes, I agree with that. But in wartime, you have people who rape and pillage that might not necessarily do that in other circumstances. So there's an environmental component. And I absolutely think that what you think in your head is absolutely your own and you're entitled to it. And I think it was Risa that said there's no thought police. So I want to applaud that. But there are also in what is it, Africa, there are tribes that deal with the envy issue, that if you compliment somebody, it becomes a gift and they give it to you. So there isn't that envy and inequity. And to some extent, getting back to the environmental, we have, and this is such a huge global concept that you attacked, Scott. I give you kudos for it. But, we have such broad socioeconomic disparity that to some extent that could explain some of what we consider immoral on a lighter level. If you look at Les Mis, wouldn't you steal, food for your family if that was the only way you could get it? But I really liked your, what was it, egalitarian altruism. And if you could just define that again for me, because I think that's where I was going, that with the compassion, that if we understand, we are more kind to other people. But I also wanted to say that I don't agree with living in Antarctica, that you can be moral all by yourself. I think you can torture animals. I think you can be immoral all by yourself.
Okay. This time I wrote down what you said, and that's going to help me address these things. You raised very good questions, Sherry, or issues. First of all, let me just briefly address the question of determinism and whether we have free will or whether there's chemical or physical motivation. Physiological. Yeah. I mean, I'm okay with determinism. In fact, I think even if determinism was false, it wouldn't help morality any. And so the question of whether certain things are moral and whether we can make moral judgments has actually nothing to do with the question of whether determinism is, as a physical theory, is true or false. Even if someone is completely, now here's where it does play in. If someone is determined to do something because of physiological things in their brain, well, of course, that's what our brains do, is they do physiological things, and that causes them to do things. Now, still, those physiological things give rise to values, and I can judge their values as ones that they should not act on. And if they approve of their own values and they do so hypocritically because they're not really they're determined to not think things through, to rationalize instead of thinking things through more carefully and evaluating more properly that what they're doing is wrong and therefore stopping from doing it, then I can judge them and say, there's something wrong in your brain. You better stop that. And if you're doing harm as you don't stop that, it's right for me to stop you. And that's my moral judgment acting more properly than yours. So we can separate the question of whether someone is making a correct moral judgment from the question of whether they're determined. I might be determined to do what I'm doing. That doesn't mean that I'm not doing it correctly. Maybe I'm determined to do the mathematical problem 2 + 2 correctly and I get 4. That may be determined, but there's still a difference between doing it right and wrong. There's correct answers. Now, you raised again the question of internal thoughts, whether whether there should be no thought police. Well, look, I mean, I would agree that even very largely, with perhaps extraordinarily rare exceptions, what we write and speak should be largely unpoliced. Again, with rare exceptions, if you burn, the classic, if you yell fire in a burning building, you shouldn't do that. And you could be prosecuted for that. But if you say, in print, the Nazis aren't that bad, you're a vile person. Should you be stopped? Should you be put in jail? Probably not. You can be put in jail in Germany because they see that as a much more serious thing. Maybe they have a reason for that. The context matters. Different context over there. Even more so for your thoughts. I would agree even that, if I have a passing thought of thinking, Nazis did something right or whatever, or a passing thought of hoping someone trips or whatever, but I quickly get away with it. It would be wrong for me to obsess over that and go, oh my God, what a terrible person I am, a sinner in the eyes of God, and blah, 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 and become miserable over it. No, I mean, get over it. There are certain things that are just not worth the trouble. That still doesn't mean that I didn't do something a teeny bit wrong. And I couldn't be a better person if I didn't even have that passing thought. It might be worth examining that. Maybe it's not worth it. I mean, sometimes self-examination goes too far down the rabbit hole and you're wasting your time. Sometimes it's more important, and context matters.
But we also are limited by our humanness. You know, we
Oh,
are not
yeah.
perfect
No,
creatures.
no. I agree. Yeah, and some of our, like I said, we have bad instincts. Some of our instincts are selfish. And if I have an instinct to be somewhat selfish, if I spend all my time grousing over that and going, oh, I'm just, because I'm born human, I'm terrible, I'm probably making things worse, not just for myself, but for other people around me. That's not the right answer. So even too much self-reflection can be bad. That doesn't mean I should, okay, here's what I'd say. It's not that we should then accept our imperfections because the imperfections are okay. It's that we should accept our imperfections, including moral imperfections, because sometimes trying to fix them leads to even more moral imperfection. So perfection would be great. You're not going to get there. Deal with it. Yeah. So that, in that sense, I do agree with you. Context, hardship. Okay, you make a good point. Some people are pressed to do things that we wouldn't judge correct in many contexts, but they're in dire straits. They're under stress. There's a meaningful moral, we don't need to go through all the details, but there's a meaningful moral difference between someone who is inclined to steal bread because they're under great hardship and someone who does it because they're lazy. Someone who is, a middle-class person in the suburbs and just likes to steal candy from baby because it makes them feel powerful, and someone who is starving after 5 days without food. Yeah, there's a difference there. We might excuse it. We might even justify it. Once again, we come back, context matters, including the psychological stresses upon you. Again, none of us are perfect. And if you say that no one is morally correct unless they would never violate certain rules or cause harm under any circumstances, you've got a pretty high bar and no one's going to make that. And if you're saying that we're all sinners, then, well, okay, yeah, but we need some more practical rules for our ordinary lives. Don't just condemn us all and then be done with it. That doesn't tell us very interesting morality.
We have a person in the room that has a question, and we have one more person on the line for a question for
you. Yeah. I think that does pretty well. Let's go to the next. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sue. So,
hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Microphone.
Yeah, okay. Hi, my name is Hachar. So I'm a student and I have just been taking notes, and I know, I heard somebody else ask who decides what's morally wrong and not, but I have another question. How do we actually assess what's wrong and what's right? In terms of morals, what skill do we actually use? And I ask that because take example for a country that, let's say, do not let people vote, bans books, but there's more peace. There's more peace. There's no hunger comparing to a country B who people do vote, but there's more hunger. There's more violence, and that people so comparing those, how do we decide which country is more morally right and which one is wrong? On what scale do we decide on that? Because I know I agree with you in terms of from times and times we have seen and evaluate what works for us and what doesn't for humans. There was a time we used to rape people and that was fine. There was a genocide and we said, okay, never again. There is still genocide going on. We could learn from that, I hope so. But so I don't know if the universal rules are made because we evaluate ourselves and we say, okay, from what we have done over the years, raping women does actually kill people. It's not good for our society, and thus we shouldn't do that. Let's set up rules that protect women. So we do come up with those universal rules, but I don't know if we do actually, I don't know if morals does play a role in that sense, because I don't see it because moderates in terms, because like, I don't know if I can say somebody's moderates are actually wrong or right, because just like taking country A comparing to country B, am I making sense?
A lot of sense, Hachar. Yes, thank you for your question. You once again are raising some very good, very deep, complicated questions. And you won't be surprised if my first response is, that's really complicated and I don't have a simple answer. And if I had it, if I gave you a simple answer, I'd be wrong. And anyone else who gives a simple answer to that and says, peace is the most important thing, more important than anything else, so war is never justified, they're wrong. If someone says the most important thing is democracy and we need to force everyone to be democratic, no matter what, no matter at what cost, that's wrong. And if someone says the most important thing is to avoid hunger, even at the cost of everything else, that's wrong. These are all very important values. It'd be nice if we could easily get all of them all the time.
Yeah, because we do not have like a full-on scale that we can just look at it. Oh, this falls here. Okay.
Yeah. And it's certainly wrong even, I mean, every country, I shouldn't say, I mean, some countries abandon some of those values altogether and say those don't matter at all. Other countries like ours and many others say, oh, each of these is important, let's try to balance them. There's good grounds for thinking we have not yet come up with the right balance. Maybe Sweden hasn't come up with the right balance. Maybe Switzerland hasn't come up with the right balance. Maybe no one in the world has come up with the right balance of these. Maybe we're all improving gradually. Maybe some of us are backsliding sometimes. So we should never even say we're doing it right. How can we make other people do it as well as we do? We may be flawed too. The idea of intervening in another country to change these, again, I'm not saying it's never right. I'm saying you'd better get your facts right. You'd better have good reason for thinking that the intervention is actually going to help. And of course, there are many ways of intervening without invading them. You could, you know, do diplomacy, economics. There are all kinds of ways of affecting. You could provide a better model for them to follow. There are all kinds of ways of improving other people. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's better to let a lesser injustice continue because trying to fix it would make things even worse. Especially if you're clumsy and you have a very simple monolithic theory about what the better thing is and how to get there. We've seen many people do that, including the US. We've also seen the US intervene, again, like in Nazi Germany, and improve things. Were there some bad consequences of the invasion, including, you know, the split between East and West Germany? Sure, yeah, and not everything was done perfectly, but it was better than leaving things the way they were. Sometimes things have to be pretty extreme to justify a change. Sometimes you just have to let people evolve on their own. So I'm afraid that I can't give you much more of a detailed answer than that, except again, reject simple, simplistic answers, continue the dialogue, see what other people have done, try to learn from them, try to improve things, and don't barge into a situation you don't understand.
Thank you. Have one more question online from Fika. Could you ask your question, Fika?
Sure, thank you very much. So I have two questions that I will be presenting very quickly. However, before that, you were speaking about war and peace and how believing that there is no absolute choice when it comes to war and peace. I absolutely believe in peace because, again, simply because I believe cooperation has better outcome when it comes to human existence and existing good than competition. Now, again, it's a matter to debate over. But going back to the question again, question number one is, do you think morality was invented or is it an inherent part of human existence, again, because as a human being, I have this existential need for surviving and for surviving well as well. So that was question number one. Question number two is, do you think that morality should be policed when it comes to different people in different positions in the society? For example, if I am just a normal everyday person, I go to my normal everyday work, maybe I should be held accountable to a certain level of morality, but my political leaders should be held accountable to a higher level. And why I say this is because my political leaders would have the possibility and ability to influence me, to press me, to guide me to do certain acts that may not be the best for my moral health, moral well-being. So again, do you think that there should be a level of policing when it comes to morality in different people, different positions in society? Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Fika. I mean, I agree with you in general that peace and cooperation is a very good state of affairs, better than most alternatives. The question is, how do you get there? If country A is attacking country B that didn't do it any harm, and you are country C, should you intervene and stop, and or just say, man, no, we're just going to cooperate and have peace? You might actually get to peace better by threatening country A to stop it, knock it off, and intervening if they don't. That might get you to more peace overall than if you just set your guns down and let things happen. You asked if morality is invented or inherent. That's a very good question. That's an important one, and I think my talk gave some answers to that. There's a sense in which we invent it. Okay, in the following sense: until somebody came along, a species like us that had enough circuits in their brain with feedback loops to make a higher order judgment, nobody in the world was making a higher order judgment. The squirrels were not thinking, oh, those evil foxes, somebody should stop them. They just didn't like the fox. That's it. Their thinking stopped there. They didn't make a moral judgment about the fox. Nor did the moral fox think, why is that squirrel running away from me? It should just surrender. No moral judgments there. Until we came along, we did it. So there's a sense in which we invent morality. But my argument was, there's only one way to invent it. There's only one way to be consistent. There's a sense in which we invented mathematics. We came up with a system of numbers, a set of symbols for how to count things, and how to count things in very complicated and sophisticated ways, more than just adding 1, 2, and 3. But there's only one way to do it. There's only one consistent way. There's a variety of ways you could make the symbols work, but some of them won't work. Some of them are inconsistent. It turns out there's only one way to do it, at least until you get to really abstract set theory, and let's not talk about that. For most practical purposes, there's only one way to invent it. That's kind of how I see morality. So another way to put it is that we came up with morality, but what we discovered is that there's only one basic moral principle. Now, that is setting aside the question of what are all the other principles that derive from that. What we should do in this particular instance, that particular instance, that's extraordinarily complicated, as I hope has been clear. The general moral principle of respecting other people, that's pretty much the only way to do it. But what that requires in practice, that's not simple at all. There might be only one right answer, but knowing what the right answer is very difficult in many cases. And maybe there are multiple equal answers in some cases because they're so complicated. You said we are born with the need to survive. Yes, but we are also born with the need for self-approval. We want to look upon ourselves and judge ourselves as being okay, being all right. That's something that we are born with that monkeys and squirrels are not born with. So that is just as strong, in some cases stronger than self-interest. And that's why it sometimes overrides self-interest. Finally, moral policing. Yeah, and this is, again, a difficult question about, how much should we go around judging each other? Well, I mean, look, we judge friends more than others. If a friend has something morally wrong, we often say, I don't like you as much now unless you change your ways. That's perfectly decent. Picking on people for small things, making mountains out of molehills, holding up to a perfectionist standard, yeah, that's kind of mean. Now you're the one being immoral because you're asking too high of a judgment. As far as public figures, you know, that can be a complicated case. I guess in general, I'd say if your job is to run the country, you should pick someone who's good at running the country and not be so concerned about anything else. And if you got a choice between someone who can run the country well and had an adulterous affair 10 years ago, and someone who is going to, you know, who never did that, never masturbated in his life, and has no bad sexual desires, has no corruption, and he'd really mess up the country, I know what I think would be the right moral choice. You know, there might be more complicated issues. If someone runs on a campaign of, you know, everyone should follow this certain moral rule and we should punish those who don't, and someone points out, oh, you broke that moral rule and you resisted punishment, that's fair. Okay. And maybe what we should conclude from that is maybe that moral rule shouldn't be as enforced as strictly as you're saying it should be. Maybe it should be. It depends upon the details. All depends upon the context.
Right. So I'm not saying anything should exist or not. Literally questions, because I find that I envy people that have more answers than questions, because I find myself really filled with many questions and not many answers in life. So the question would be, do you think that morality in humans come from their existential fears, or is it literally coming from the goodness that has come with us? So are we basically good creatures, or is it that we're very fearful and therefore we hang on to morality and virtue signalings and everything that could come with that?
Wow, that's a deep question. But I will say, in general, my answer is we are both. We have a lot of goodness in us, a lot of other directed instincts. We have a lot of fear and anxiety and self-interest in us. We have both. And you know, I mean, there's the old Native American story, right? You know, you have a good wolf and a bad wolf inside you. Which one will overpower the other? Which one do you feed? Okay. Which one should we feed? Well, the good one. But in particular cases, sometimes it might be a little hard to tell which is the good one and which is the bad one. And they both can feel very strong and compelling. Then you got to think. And so that's why morality, you know, the question of what is right, that comes not from the fear, not from the altruism. It comes from our higher order judgment. You ask, what would I want others to do? But fortunately, we're born with that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Scott, I want to thank you for a very interesting presentation. Great Q&A. We kept you a little longer than I don't know if you were planning on this long, but I do appreciate it. I'm reminded a little bit of something I saw in your write-up that you sent about yourself and I looked up. Otherwise, we can't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And again,
oh yeah, I wrote a paper on engineering engineering ethics, where some people were trying to wait to create their invention until it was perfect. And I said, you know, sometimes that leads to a good thing. Sometimes it does not. And I haven't even thought of that connection, but it applies to morality very much as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Do appreciate it.
Thank you for a great audience. You've been wonderful. Very good questions. Been a great group.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.